Blueprint for Victory, Robert DePugh. Contents, author. Forward. Our nation has reached a point of no return, a point beyond which the American people can no longer defend their freedom by the traditional means of politics and public opinion. Our next task is both obvious and urgent. We must find new and more effective means by which the enemies of freedom can be resisted and ultimately defeated. If we fail in this task, then future Americans for generations to come will live in slavery. American patriots must act quickly. We must stop supporting the U.S. Postal Service with plaintive letters to disinterested congressmen. We must stop wasting time on routine rallies and speaking tours. We must stop wasting money on fancy headquarters and elaborate offices. We must stop the petty competition that now exists between conservative organizations. We must develop a coordinated plan of action. We must know what we are fighting for as well as that which we are fighting against. We must build a firm philosophical basis for our actions and belief. We must call on the best minds available to examine man's proper relationship to government. Only from a sound philosophical base can we find the necessary courage to continue a battle against seemingly impossible odds. We must have the wisdom to avoid wishful thinking and find courage to face the facts, somber as they are. Our nation has been occupied by the enemy. Today, the chains of slavery lay lightly on our people, but with every passing day, the chains become stronger and the American people are more tightly bound. We must either break these chains soon while they are yet weak, or else we must face an uncertain future, frightful to behold. Never in all of recorded history has a people saved themselves from tyranny through political means alone. We must study past resistance movements to learn which tactics are successful and avoid those that are futile. We must study the methods which our enemies are using against us, and we must use their own strategies against them. We must investigate every opportunity and seize on every possible advantage. Nothing short of total effort can hope to succeed. Chapter 1. The Challenge. That the American people will refuse to protect the freedom of their own children is a terrible disgrace. That we have purposefully turned our backs on those already enslaved makes this disgrace compounded. Throughout the communist countries, over 100 million people live in slave labor camps. These poor souls exist in unheated barracks, eat slop unfit for pigs, and work their hearts out for the rest of their lives until finally they will die of exhaustion and malnutrition. We cannot in good conscience forget these people. The great challenge of our age is to free the people of the captive nations, to open the gates of the slave camps and torture chambers. Our challenge is not only to protect our own freedom, but to renew the dignity of man throughout all the world. How the patriots are to meet this challenge seems a mystery. Countless thousands go on wasting time, energy, and money on types of activity that show no evidence of having removed one single communist from the enemy ranks, or having extended the frontiers of freedom by a single inch. At the same time, we see, with every passing month, many conservatives who give up trying entirely. These have lost faith in the power of words. They have accepted the fact that polite measures have no chance of success. Still, they are not psychologically prepared to use those methods still available to us that have some chance of victory. As a result, they are often justly accused of being for nothing and against everything. Most of us know in our hearts what it is that we are fighting for, but it's hard to put into words. We know that we want to preserve our great American heritage for future generations. We want safety, not quite the same as security, for ourselves and our families. We are willing to accept personal responsibility in return for individual freedom. We're not afraid of competition, and we want the right to compete fairly for the better things in life. We cherish our personal privacy and the right to be left alone. We expect to make our own decisions and accept the risks involved. To the true individualist, each of these things is important. Added together, they are so important that we will gladly risk our lives to preserve them. The collectivists, on the other hand, are incapable of creative thought, and they fear personal initiative in others. Their security lies in being part of the herd. They are distrustful of the mavericks who prefer to go it alone. Yet the right to go it alone is the essence of individual freedom. Thus the collectivists are the mortal enemies of freedom. Freedom cannot be destroyed, but it can be suppressed. It may be suppressed temporarily by force or by fear. To suppress freedom among a large number of people over a long period of time requires organized effort, and this in turn requires a bureaucracy. As our government bureaucracy becomes larger, our freedom becomes ever more restricted. The one and only way that individual freedom can be increased is to reduce the size and power of the governing bureaucracy. The size of our bureaucracy becomes greater each year, and with each passing day, the rate of our growth becomes even faster. In the United States, we have two major political parties that vie for control of this bureaucracy. The professional bureaucrats of both political parties have a vested interest in its continued growth. Their personal power is derived entirely from bureaucratic power. None of these people want to see the size or power of the bureaucracy reduced. None of them offer any real hope for the cause of freedom. Those who make up our government bureaucracy use the threat of the Soviet and Chinese bureaucracies as an excuse for their own existence. Obviously, the people who make up these other governments use the threat of the warmongering American bureaucrats in a similar manner to oppress their people. Thus, the major governments of the world are actually allies in the suppression of freedom everywhere. Most of these bureaucrats produce nothing and contribute nothing. They live as parasites on the productive population. The parasitic government officials on both sides of the Iron Curtain recognize a kinship between themselves even though they compete with one another. They may fear each other, but they fear the productive body of humanity even more. A tapeworm may not be as vigorous as the mammal it lives in, but it is fully capable of destroying its host. The bureaucratic parasites are thinking parasites, and they are fantastically egotistical. They will go to any ends rather than admit to themselves what they really are. This results in a frantic drive to justify their own actions, to multiply their own numbers and increase their control. They become paranoid in their efforts to compliment and exalt themselves and their fellow parasites. An ever-increasing number of awards, prizes, and honorary degrees are bestowed on the parasite elite. Ever greater numbers of scholarships and grants must nourish the newly developing parasites. In addition to their ability to think, to calculate, but not reason, they are also organized. They call their system socialism rather than parasitism. When their victims become too alarmed, they may change the name to the democracy, the New Deal, the Great Society. Everywhere that it exists, socialism survives only as a parasite drawing on the productive free enterprise systems around it. As the number of parasites grow, the drain on the producers becomes ever greater. Already, we see many producers who simply stop producing, some because they resent feeding the parasites, and others because they join them. When enough people stop producing, the American way of life as we have known it will cease to exist. At least some of the parasites realize this fact, but that does not mean they will change. A tapeworm will never change its way of life because it is incapable of any other. Some of the more clever parasites think that they can use science to save themselves, and in one sense of the word, to save the productive host that they must continue to live in. Bertrand Russell, a godlike hero of the socialists, discusses how this might be done in his 1953 book, The Impact of Science on Society. It is to be expected that advances in psychology will give governments much more control over individual mentality than they have now. Education should aim at destroying free will so that after pupils have left school, they shall be incapable throughout the rest of their lives of thinking or acting otherwise than as their schoolmaster would have wished. Diet, injections, and injunctions will combine from a very early age to produce the sort of character and the sort of beliefs that the authorities consider desirable. And any serious criticism of the powers that be will become psychologically impossible. Even if all are miserable, all will believe themselves happy because the government will tell them that they are so. The system, one may surmise, will be something like this, except possibly the governing aristocracy. All but 5% of males and 30% of females will be sterilized. The 30% of females will be expected to spend the years from 18 to 40 in reproduction. As a rule, artificial insemination will be preferred to the natural method. The unsterilized, if they desire the pleasure of love, will usually have to seek them with sterilized partners. Children will be taken from their mothers and reared by professional nurses. To those accustomed to this system, the family as we know it would seem as queer as the totem organization of the Australian Aborigines seems to us. The laboring class will have such long hours of work and so little to eat that their desires will hardly extend beyond sleep and food. The upper class, being deprived of the softer pleasures, both by the abolition of the family and the supreme duty of devotion to the state, will acquire the mentality of ascetics. They will care only for power, and in the pursuit of it will not shrink from cruelty. Gradually, by selective breeding, the congenital differences between the rulers and the ruled will increase until they become almost different species. A revolt of the plebes would become as unthinkable as an organized insurrection of sheep against the practice of eating mutton. My personal commentary is that that has already happened in a great many ways, um, although the lines of the cast are carefully disguised. I'll continue. Thus, from Bertrand Russell, we have received this description of scientific society. We have passed through the New Deal, the Fair Deal, and the New Frontier. We are now living in the Great Society. Is the scientific society coming next? All conservatives unavoidably read a great deal of socialist propaganda. It's too bad that so few patriots ever read what the one world socialists write to and for each other. Their own words tell us what it is for which we are really fighting. We are fighting not only for our freedom and for the American way of life, we are fighting for the very existence of future generations as part of the human species. For the true American patriot of today, there are only two alternatives: victory or death. The socialist elite leaves us no other choice. And as a personal commentary, that was the end of chapter 1. This was written back in the Cold War days before the Immigration Act, and it's pretty obvious that we, white Americans, are very much under threat if we don't rise up.